Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're literally pulling back the curtain on the comedy industry. We're going to explore this really fascinating tension between comedy's ancient roots as a tool for societal subversion and the modern, highly corporatized battle for authenticity in Hollywood. We'll be diving into our sources to break down exactly what happens when a comedian's raw truth collides with the polished machinery of entertainment. Let's get right into it.
We're kicking things off with this fascinating perspective from our source material, which proposes something almost counterintuitive. The idea here is that comedians act as society's ultimate, unfiltered truth-tellers. The premise? Well, a true comedian literally can't fake it. They're bound to a level of honesty that most of us just avoid in daily life. They say what the rest of us are only thinking, basically acting as a necessary, almost divine gift to a world that so often obscures reality.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll cover comedians as truth-tellers, ancient roots of subversion, the sacred comedy code, gatekeepers and industry plants, and finally, the price of authenticity.
All right, Section 1, Comedians as Truth-Tellers, the Burden of Honesty in Entertainment.
You know, it's so easy to look at comedy as just a fun way to pass the time, right? But the burden of honesty in this field is actually incredibly heavy. Our sources point out that while we see comics primarily as entertainers, their fundamental job is holding a mirror right up to society. When a comedian stands on stage and picks apart a social norm, they're relying on their own unfiltered perspective to connect with you. If that observation isn't completely authentic, well, the laugh just doesn't land.
Moving on to Section 2, Ancient Roots of Subversion, from Greek Rituals to Vaudeville.
To really grasp the modern controversies we see in comedy today, we have to rewind and look at its historical foundation as a tool for political dissent. Western comedy actually kicked off in Athens around the 5th century BCE, where playwrights like Aristophanes used biting political satire to go after the elite. Fast forward to the 16th century, and you've got Italy's Commedia dell'arte using improvised theater to flip social hierarchies upside down. Then, by the late 19th century, vaudeville brought these subversive traditions to massive crowds in the US and the UK. And that brings us to the 1950s stand-up revolution. This is where pioneers like Lenny Bruce and George Carlin completely transformed stand-up into a direct vehicle for free speech and sharp social critique. So while the format definitely changed over the centuries, that core mission of speaking truth to power, that stayed exactly the same.
Which brings us to Section 3, the sacred comedy code, protecting the truth on stage.
Because a comedian's material is essentially their lived raw truth, protecting it from theft has always been a fiercely fought battle behind the scenes. Insiders actually call this the sacred comedy code. Just listen to this incredibly explicit warning from the late great Bernie Mac, who used to preach this to younger comics like it was absolute gospel. The real tragedy here is that this lesson came from his own open wounds. According to our sources, Bernie Mac had a documented real-life fallout with Steve Harvey during the original Kings of Comedy tour over stolen material. Bernie even claims Steve made a move to take his spot in the movie Ocean's 11, an opportunity that was a massive deal for his career. So for Bernie, this code wasn't just some hypothetical rule, it was literal survival in an industry packed with people looking to profit off someone else's truth.
And we see this theft of truth happen on a massive corporate scale too. Take Dave Chappelle's highly publicized battle over his show's streaming rights. This really highlights how corporate platforms have historically profited from a comedian's unfiltered genius. Chappelle signed a contract super early in his career, and when his show blew up into a massive cultural phenomenon, the network kept streaming it, continuously building off his creativity, while he saw almost none of a fair return. He actually famously referred to the industry players as people fencing stolen goods. Pretty intense, right?
Up next, Section 4, Gatekeepers and Industry Plants, when the Hollywood machine manufactures truth. So what exactly happens when the industry tries to manufacture this truth, entirely bypassing that grueling traditional grind of comedy? Well, comedian Cat Williams brought this concept straight to the forefront of pop culture recently. In a viral interview, he explicitly labeled Kevin Hart as a textbook industry plant. He suggested that Hart didn't rise purely through the organic, brutal grind of stand-up, but rather that he was positioned, propped up, and guided to the top by powerful forces operating behind the curtain.
The source material draws a really sharp contrast between two very different career paths here. On the one hand, you've got the authentic grind, spending years doing local stand-up, organically building a fan base, and testing out jokes night after agonizing night. Williams neutrally contrasts this with what he alleges is Kevin Hart's manufacture trajectory. He basically asks, how could someone claim their comedic upbringing was entirely on the East Coast, yet somehow in their very first year in Los Angeles, land a network sitcom and the leading role in the movie Soul Plane? According to Williams' claims, nobody in Hollywood remembers Hart ever having a sold-out show or a line around the block at a comedy club before all these major deals were already locked in place.
Now, this underlying tension over authenticity really bubbled to the surface when Kevin Hart used this exact phrase, "I ain't scared of you," to promote his Netflix roast. If you know comedy, you know this was Bernie Mac's legendary 90s war cry. It was so intrinsic to Bernie's raw identity that they literally named his documentary after it. By wrapping himself in Bernie's legacy, our sources note that Hart opened himself up to some intense, critical comparisons from his peers regarding his own authenticity.
To fully grasp the scope of this industry friction, let's break down the specific allegations Katt Williams made in that explosive interview. Now keep in mind, these are unverified claims, but they give us a really clear window into this fierce protection of the comedy code. Williams alleges that Cedric the Entertainer took a meticulously crafted joke Katt performed on BET's Comic View back in 1998, slightly tweaked it, changing a car to a spaceship, and then used it as his closer for the Kings of Comedy tour. He also claims Steve Harvey didn't quit stand-up to do television, but because Katt absolutely destroyed him in a comedy battle in Detroit by calling out his wig. He goes on to label Tyler Perry as a gatekeeper who fails to elevate other actors. And he alleges that for a 5-year period, Kevin Hart systematically took movie roles that were originally meant for Katt himself.
Finally, Section 5, the price of authenticity, the true cost of a laugh.
You see, maintaining genuine integrity in this cutthroat business takes a massive personal toll. Being a truth teller, it's not a cheap endeavor. Our sources present a really stark contrast between Bernie Mac's reality and the modern Hollywood standard. Bernie Mac represented true, grounded authenticity. He stayed married to his high school sweetheart for 31 years, proudly had no outside children, and even stepped up to raise his teenage niece. Most importantly, he completely separated his wild stage character from his real life as a devoted family man in Chicago. The sources contrast this directly with the modern industry standard, specifically pointing to Kevin Hart's highly publicized 2017 scandal to highlight this blurring of performance, identity, and the moral compromises made for the sake of Hollywood access.
And the literal financial cost of keeping that integrity intact. It's staggering. Katt Williams emphasized this extreme cost in his interview, stating he actually had to turn down $50 million on 4 separate occasions just to protect his moral compass. He speaks super openly about rejecting industry shortcuts, refusing to go to unsavory Hollywood parties, and dealing with the harsh consequences of not playing ball with powerful gatekeepers. He argues that taking the shortcut essentially strips you of the right to claim the same hard-earned legacy as the comics who actually put in the brutal work.
So the crucial question we want to leave you with today is this. As comedy becomes more and more corporatized, packaged, and mass-produced, has it lost its original sacred duty to simply tell the unfiltered truth? Can a comedian truly hold a mirror up to society if their career was built by the exact same Hollywood machine they're supposed to be critiquing? It is a fascinating, complex landscape, and one that forces us to ask a really difficult question the next time we stream a comedy special. What are we really laughing at? The authentic truth of a tortured artist, or just a very well-funded corporate imitation? Thanks so much for joining us on this explainer. Keep seeking the truth, and we'll see you next time.